Let's go back in time to Finland, where on June 4th, 1960, four teenagers set out to go camping on the beautiful shores of Lake Bodom, near the city of Espoo in Oida Manor. Two 15-year-old girls named Malia and Anya were joined by their two 18-year-old boyfriends, Seppo and Niles, on what was supposed to be an innocent camping trip, but one that would end in horror on the early morning of Sunday, June 5th, between the hours of 4 and 6 a.m. Around 11 a.m., police were notified by a jogger that they had found bodies. When police arrived around noon, they found Anya and Seppo inside of their tent. It appeared that the killer had actually cut the ties of the tent and begun stabbing and bludgeoning Anya and Seppo through the fabric of the tent itself. Malia was found on top of the tent and was undressed from the waist down, even though there weren't any signs of a sexual assault. She had, however, sustained significantly worse injuries in comparison to the others. She had even been stabbed numerous times after already dying. Niles was found outside of the tent as well with multiple injuries, including a concussion, a fractured jaw, and a deep knife wound to the forehead, but he was still alive. Niles Wilhelm Gustafsson would survive the attacks and claimed later that he had no memories of what happened whatsoever. The killer had attacked all four of them brutally with a knife and an unidentified blunt force weapon, possibly a rock, but it was never found out for sure. After these brutal attacks, the killer stole some of their personal items from the victims, including their wallets, motorcycle keys, and even some pieces of clothing, but left behind the motorcycles themselves. Niles' shoes and some of the stolen clothing would be found later about a half a mile away from the crime scene, while other things such as the wallets and the murder weapons were never found. Not long thereafter, a group of young boys came forward saying that around 6 a.m. they had been out bird watching and they had seen a blond man walking away from the collapsed tent at the site. Over the years since this horrific massacre, there have been numerous suspects in these brutal murders, but there's been three who to this day still stand out. The first person is Karl Vladimir Gillstrom, who is known by most people as Blythe, and he was known to be a harsh man that ran a nearby kiosk, and he absolutely hated campers. The community would say things like he was known to be violent, even harsh with campers in the area and cut down their tents. He would throw rocks at passing children and other campers that would come down his street. And during a conversation with one of his neighbors when Karl was drunk, he supposedly confessed to the murders, but police would go on to halt their investigation after speaking to Karl's wife. Karl's wife told police that he had been asleep in bed with her at the time of the murders, and it is worth noting as well that Karl had been filling in a well at the time in his front yard just days after the murders. This has caused numerous people to wonder if he was hiding the murder weapons or maybe some of the missing evidence in this well. When police searched his property, however, they didn't uncover anything that was incriminating. In 1969, Karl would go on to drown himself in Lake Bodom, and it was rumored that he had left a suicide note confessing to the crimes. When his wife was on her deathbed, she would actually go on to recant her statement, giving him an alibi and claimed to be scared of him at the time, and stated that Karl had threatened to kill her if she told police that he had not been at home with her at the time of the murders. Some members of the community have even spoke out saying that they had seen Karl coming back from the scene that day but were too afraid to report him to the police. In the end, no DNA was ever recovered from Karl. Another suspect would be a man named Hans Assmann, who was an alleged KGB spy and former Nazi that lived several kilometers away from the lake. And on June 6th, Hans would enter the surgical hospital that was local to the area with his fingernails covered in dirt and clothing that had been covered in red stains. The hospital staff reported him to be acting very nervous and aggressive at the time. The police briefly questioned him and then claimed he had a solid alibi and was supposedly in Germany at the time of the murders. So police didn't really take any clothing from him to be examined, even though the doctors insisted that the stains on him were in fact blood. Hans also raised numerous other red flags. After he had seen the news reports of the sketch that derived from the group of boys that had reported seeing someone that day, Hans would go on to cut his long blonde hair. Hans would go on to write 3 books about his connection to the murders. A former detective even managed to connect him to 5 additional unsolved homicides. Many people believe that Hans' political connections are the reason that he was dismissed as the murderer, even though there were multiple publications alluding to his guilt. Hans would remain a suspect until 2004. Because in 2004, 44 years after the murders, the case would be reopened when they claimed to have more advanced technology as well as finding new blood evidence found on Niles' pair of shoes, along with new testimony from a woman who claimed to be camping nearby at the time of the murders. The blood was said to be from the three deceased, and that Niles' blood was not present on them. This DNA would lead them to make the new suspect in the case and the lone survivor, Niles Wilhelm Gustafsson, one and the same. And on March 2004, Niles would be arrested, with his trial beginning on August 4th, 2005. The prosecution would claim that Niles, in a drunk and jealous rage, killed his girlfriend Malia and then his other two friends. They believed that explained the severity of the injuries she sustained and why her body was found outside of the tent. They also claimed that Niles had gotten into a fistfight with Seppo, which had resulted in his facial injuries. They claimed that Niles had killed the other two teens in an attempt to have no witnesses, and then inflicted the other injuries on himself to make it appear as if he had been attacked. The new witness would state both boys had entered her tent and that Niles had behaved in a very aggressive manner toward her. The defense would claim, however, that Niles had no motives to commit the crime, nor could he even kill three people with the extent of his injuries, and that he couldn't have inflicted those injuries on himself. During his trial, a reporter would ask Niles how he knew he was innocent if he had no memories of the events, and Niles would respond with, "I'm innocent, and that's that." Niles would go on to be convicted of the murders, and after having served just a few months of a life sentence, he would eventually win an appeal, and on October 7th, 2005, he would be cleared of all charges and released. The court stated that this verdict was due to the prosecution's evidence, which was inconclusive, and that they had failed to show a motive. The state of Finland would go on to pay Niles for his mental health suffering caused by being falsely incarcerated, but he was refused permission to sue for defamation. Even after Niles' acquittal, many would still see him as guilty. However, with Niles now cleared of all charges and most of the other suspects being deceased, it seems there will never be justice brought to these victims. The mystery will go on, becoming a scary story told around campfires as a cautionary tale to generation after generation on the banks of Lake Bodom, the same lake that hosted this bloody and horrific crime. Although these murders did not occur on a Friday or on the 13th, the similarities are chilling and have caused many to wonder if the Friday the 13th franchise was in fact based off of these crimes.